Jeff. Thank you so much for being here today. We're so grateful that we get
Hey.
to interview you. I would love if you could introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Jeff Nelson. I am the author of the upcoming book. Well, at the time that this is going to air, it's going to be out already, but as of now, it's upcoming. It's Ninja Punk's Bleep Off. There's an F bomb in it that's censored, but I'm very excited. It's been a very long journey to get my first book published, and it's pretty cool that it's happening.
Amazing. I would love if you could tell us what your book is about.
So yeah, it's very much like a hero's journey story, but it's about punk rock and ninjas because those are two things that I grew up, very much a nerd, and I grew up listening to punk rock music, obviously, and I kind of got the idea for it when I was like, I just want to write a story that has everything I like in it. I'm a black belt in Brazilian jiu-jitsu. I've always grown up watching Japanese cartoons. I'm 34, so in the late 90s, I would come home from school and watch Toonami. I would read a lot of manga and comic books and things like that. But also, I was also a very big reader of fantasy novels too, and also the classics as well. So there's kind of that mix of everything in it. And I really think when it releases, folks are going to be like, "What is this?" But I think that's going to be the fun part about it. I think people are going to see the title and they'll be like, "This is going to be something kind of comedic," and then they open the first chapter and it's a Japanese history chapter, and it's a chapter set in 1598 in Japan, and it's written in partially Homeric verse, and they're like, "What?" So I think that's gonna be the fun part of that.
Love it. What inspired you to write your book?
So I've been writing my whole life. I do have a speech impediment, so writing was a much more optimal way for me to communicate when I was younger than actually speaking was, because speaking, even to this day, for me is not always the easiest task, depending on how much it's acting up. But so I guess I've always wanted to be a writer. I actually have a comic book that I wrote 10 years ago, and frankly, it's not very good, but it's out. It's but yeah, I mean, I guess what inspired me to read it was what inspired me to write it was that I just kind of wanted to write something that was everything that I enjoyed in one package, and um, you know, um, but there's a lot of other things too. I think just storytelling in general, that medium, I think is shifting very greatly. You're seeing all the big corporate monoliths kind of reducing their cultural presence, and like indie creators are starting to pop up everywhere. And I was just I came up with the idea 2 years ago. I feel like, yeah, it was April 2022, so almost 2 years ago. And it started out as a screenplay for like a Netflix style show, and I met with someone who, because I've been trying to make it as a writer for over a decade now. So if there are any aspiring authors or writers that are listening, you're in it for the long haul. It's definitely going to be a decade plus long process, unless you get very, very lucky. um, but yeah, I wrote the screenplays out, and I had contact with someone who had some experience in the entertainment industry. He worked in television and things like that, and I kind of asked him. I said, "Hey, if I send you the first episode of this and you read it, um, could you meet up and we could talk about it?" Because I'm that kind of person where if I meet a contact, I'm always trying to make full advantage of that contact. So he said, sure. He was very kind to do that. So I sent him the script, and I said, like, "Hey, let's meet for coffee next week." So fast forward a week, and we meet for coffee, and he's like, "Well, first off, I very much enjoyed it, but what do you want to do with this?" And I said, "Well, me being the overzealous individual that I can be sometimes, I was like, well, I would personally like it if Netflix just gave me a full budget and full creative freedom. And he looked at me and he was like, that's not going to happen. He was just like, I don't want to burst your bubble. I like you, but that's probably not going to happen. So he's like, if you want to have so basically he told me that if you want to have full control over this and to really like steer it the way you want to, make it into a book and then go from there. So I started writing the book form. I believe I wrote the first draft of the book, which, if you count every iteration of the story, is fourth draft because there were three drafts of the screenplays. I believe. I don't know. Yeah, I believe there were three drafts, but I could be mistaken. So yeah, this was the fourth draft of the book. Was the first draft of the book was the fourth draft of the overall story, if that makes any sense at all. And after I finished the first draft, I found a hybrid publisher to go with, and yeah, it's been great.
Amazing. When you were writing your book, who were you thinking of when it comes to who your book is for?
Um, Honestly, it was kind of just for everyone who. That's a good question. I mean, it's kind of weird because some people say it's a very niche audience, but I think it's a very broad audience. I think it's for pretty much anyone who likes something different. I mean, I think, which isn't this, which isn't, I think every author thinks that they're different or like, or the next greatest thing, which, I don't necessarily think that, but I think it's definitely a bit off the beaten path what I've written. It's definitely a genre blend, which I think that's kind of what's popping up here and there, especially in the as more creator owned projects keep surfacing, and the traditional way of getting your book published is starting to fade a little bit. I think we're starting to see more of that genre blend, which is honestly, I think, pretty cool. So yeah, I think my book is for pretty much anyone who likes Japanese history, or they like they like the aesthetics of the underground punk scene, or they like or Japanese cartoons or things like that.
Awesome. How long have you been writing and what made you really sit down and start?
So yeah, so again, I've been writing basically ever since I was a little kid. Again, I grew up with a speech impediment, so it was always just kind of easier for me to write. And I always kind of had an ever wandering mind. My mind's a very busy place sometimes, and and I think the first ever. I mean, let me think. The first ever story I wrote of my own volition was a story that's now called that I now call the Abandoned Lands, which hasn't been published yet. It's kind of like it's kind of like my magnum opus that I hope to release someday. It's going to be like a 2,000-page massive like high fantasy thing, which it's not really great for a first release. Someone's like, hey, this is my first release. That's this long. They're like, "Wait, what?" um, but but yeah, I think I wrote that story in its first incarnation when I was 11 or 12. And I always excelled at the more creative aspects of school when I was coming up through the grades. Like I always excelled in writing and things like that. So it's pretty much just it's just kind of been something I've always kind of been good at.
Amazing. What is your schedule like when you are writing a book?
Um, yeah, it's kind of frenetic. It's kind of I always carry around a notebook, or just like, or in the modern age, I've got my cell phone. If I have an idea, I just jot it down real quick, and you know, and that takes care of that. But yeah, I try to write usually at night. For some reason, I'm kind of a night owl with that kind of thing, and yeah, I just, for some reason, in the hours of like 11:30 at night to 2 in the morning, just yeah, I can just write I just write very well. Then, it doesn't really speak well for my overall health to, to stay up for that long, but you know, it is what it is.
What do you need in your writing space to help you stay focused?
Uh, Honestly, I like being in public when I write. I really don't like being alone. Like, I just get distracted. Like it's the kind of thing where if I am at home and I'm writing, I look out the window and then I turn on YouTube and I walk around the house and I'm just like, oh well, that's waste. That was a massive just yeah, that was a massive waste of time. But obviously, I have to do that when it's that um, during my basic schedule. I usually have to write at home, so I kind of have to have some things to try and keep me focused. I usually have to keep the lights off, so there's nothing around me that will distract me. And just it's kind of this weird thing where like I found that I'm at my creative peak at late hours, but living in Connecticut, there's really no coffee shops or anything that are open that late. So I kind of had to like adapt and just be like, okay, so what can I do to have my space where I don't get sidetracked? And I go into my room sometimes and I shut the lights off. There sometimes I even go like into my bathroom and I turn the fan on because the sound helps me like just the sound of the fan kind of it can get me to focus. Just I know that's odd, but
Amazing. What is your favorite writing snack and drink?
oh, that's a good question. Kombucha. I drink a lot of kombucha. I drink a lot of that. Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure I'm single handedly supporting the Kavita kombucha brand because I drink a lot of that. So yeah, definitely that. Probably for a snack, anything from the aisle at Trader Joe's. Like I just go like every day, like every time I go grocery shopping, I go into the snack aisle at Trader Joe's and just like it's for anyone who likes snacks. It's just like it's just that little that one little bit of aisle is like just heaven.
Love it. What type of books do you personally enjoy reading?
Yeah, so I like a lot of classics. I grew up reading the Greek classics. Like the Iliad, the Odyssey. I read the Iliad every year. I grew up reading a lot of high fantasy. Right now, my favorite author. I know this is kind of a cliche opinion, but my favorite author right now is Brandon Sanderson, the guy who wrote Mistborn and Stormlight Archive. I think just like, I mean, The Way of Kings is probably of the 21st century of books to come out in the 21st century. My favorite book to come out this century. It's amazing. If you've not read it, I highly recommend it. But when I was younger, I also read a lot of the American classic authors. I read a lot of Mark Twain. I read a few books by Hemingway. I read a lot of Tom Wolfe. I used to love Jack Kerouac when I was in like late high school. What else? Who else? I'm just trying to think. Oh yeah, I used to read a lot. I think I read all of the books by Thompson. Yeah, Fear and Loathing, and things like that. But yeah, that's kind of like it's kind of like a whole combination of books that I like.
Amazing. Are there any books or authors that inspired you to become a writer?
Um, Actually, you're gonna laugh at me. So, what inspired me to write my first story was not a book, even though I did grow up reading a lot of books. It was actually so this book that I wrote when I was well, that's not a book. It's just a story that that in the last draft of it is very long, but it's now called the Abandoned Lands, and but in its first incarnation, when I was like 10 years old, I went over to my friend's house, or I was like either I was I was young. I was either 10 or 11 or 12. I forget exactly, but somewhere in that ballpark. I went to my friend's house and we watched the movie Blade. And when I was a kid, I thought that was the coolest thing ever. And I went home and I wrote a story that's now the story that I have that's not published, but it's kind of what I want to do down the line. And uh, and in its first incarnation, it was just a copy of Blade, just with different characters. It was just a blatant ripoff. So that was kind of the first thing that was like, oh, I want to write a story. But even back then, I was reading the Red Wall books. I was reading. I read up until the Goblet of Fire in Harry Potter, and then I guess I just kind of lost interest halfway through the Goblet of Fire, which probably says more about me than the book, because I know but I read. What else did I read? I read a lot of the Star Wars novels, like pretty much all of them. I've got a whole bin full of them at my. I got a whole bin of them back at my place. But yeah, so those were kind of the main things that I read as a kid growing up.
Amazing. So that comes into the what books did you grow up reading, but did you have an all-time favorite?
My all-time favorite book. That's tough. I guess it depends on the genre. I think, like, I very much liked, you know, hmm, that's tough. Like, I've got a top five for sure, but I would say right now, if I were to have a top five favorite, my favorite book of all time right now is probably again The Way of Kings by Sanderson. I love that book so much. I read it four times, which again is a 1,300-page book, so it's long. So to say I've read it four times kind of speaks volumes for how I feel about it.
Amazing. On the other side of that, now as an adult, what are your favorite series or authors that if they come out with something, you automatically grab it?
Again, Sanderson is definitely that guy where I mean, I don't read everything he releases because he's very uh, prolific, but he's definitely someone who, when he has the next Mistborn book or the next Strong My book, I am on it like that. I forget his name, but there's this guy who, oh, man, what? There's this guy who wrote the Powder Mage trilogy. I forget his name because my 34-year-old brain, I my 34-year-old brain remembers books, not authors sometimes. So, but yeah, he's someone whose work that I also very much enjoy. And honestly, just like the fantasy genre as a whole right now, I really think is booming. And just so I like to just go into the fantasy section at any local bookstore and just kind of see what's there.
Amazing. What would you tell someone just starting to read again?
Um, I would just say to go at your own pace and because I've taken time off um, from reading before, and it can definitely be discouraging because I do feel like it's a skill, and when there's some times where you come back to reading and you're sluggish and you're not really grasping what's happening, which I've been there too. And I would just say, just kind of have just kind of set, like, I want to read one book this month, and I'm going to say I'll read 20 pages a night, and start there, as you get back into it, you're going to find it. You're going to find it gets easier and easier. Like, for instance, like, I took, so like when I'm on a writing kick, I don't read at all. I just write, and then and so when I get back into reading, I'm kind of rusty with that. So I usually start out with something simpler, and then after I finish a book that's simpler, I go into something more complex. So, for instance, I finished because I just got back into reading after I finished the latest draft of Ninja Punks, and I started with a Star Wars book that I had not read. You know, it's a good book, but it's not particularly complex. And now I'm reading Heke Monogatari, which is a Japanese classic from the late Heian era. So, just to give context to that, that's like the year 1100 something. So it's pretty old, and it's translated into English from Old Japanese, and that's not exactly a one-to-one translation. So it's not the easiest read, but now that I'm kind of back up to speed, I'm getting through it.
Amazing. On the other side of that, what would you tell someone just starting to write their own book?
Yeah, I would just say don't worry about it being good because it's probably not going to be. Your first draft is probably not going to be good. And that's not personal to you. That's just probably how it works out. If you wrote a first draft that you can sell or you can publish or you can turn to a bestseller, then I want to know what your technique is because I don't know it. And that's kind of something that I had to learn too. As in my decades of trying to get a book published is, when I was in high school and college, I would just think like, okay, this first draft is it. I know what I wrote. I know it's good. Let's go. And I would show it to someone and they'd be like, uh, and me being kind of immature at the time, I would be like, well, I guess you didn't like it then. I guess I just suck. And then I get mad at myself. And, it's usually not the right way to approach the process. So, just keep in mind that it's probably what you wrote has good ideas, but it's not yet brought all together. And if you have to work with an editor, just know that they're trying to help you. So in the case that your editor can seem harsh at times, it's all from a spot of trying to help because my editor for Ninja Punks that was I took like a weekend to process his feedback for it. I remember he wrote he wrote you have written a very fun, compelling novel with some great characters. However, just like oh god. So, you know, just keep that in mind that it's about the journey.
Love that. What's one thing that people are generally surprised to find out about you?
That I am a black belt in jiu-jitsu, and that I have trained with some of the best athletes in jiu-jitsu in the world, and that I was competing at a very high level for a long time. And that's something that I think that makes me a bit of an odd duck for a lot of folks. Most people when they're in their early 20s want to climb the corporate ladder of a company or whatever. And I was like, I'm gonna go train jiu-jitsu until my knees break. So that's what I did.
Amazing. Is there anything you would like to say or add?
Nothing really. Just thank you for your time. And Ninja Punks bleep off at the time of this podcast airing should be out, and I would love if you read it. And
Amazing. That'll run into our last question of where's the best place for readers to find your book? Is signed copies an option and the best place to connect with you?
So yeah, you can follow me on Instagram at Thought and Mind Writing. If you want to buy my book, it will be available on Amazon, and I believe it will be available in Barnes and Noble as well. But I will check that with my publisher. And what was the last thing you said? Sorry.
Signed copies.
Oh, signed copies. Yeah, if you want a signed copy, just you can get the book and you can shoot me a DM and I'll send you the address to send it to, and I'll sign it and send it back to you.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for being here today. We're so grateful we got to interview you. We'll be sure to drop those links in the show notes. That way everyone can find you. And again, thank you so much.
But thank you. Have a good one.